Hi, I'm Ruth Neill, and this is.
I'm Claudia Freeman.
And we're Admiral nurses in the Community Admiral Nurse Service in Wakefield. And we're really pleased to join you here today at Dementia UK Summer School. We're going to talk to you today about some of the next steps that you might want to take after a dementia diagnosis and some of the impacts that a dementia diagnosis might have.
So today's aim is to understand what families can do after receiving a diagnosis of dementia. And we're going to do this by considering the impact on a person diagnosed, including family and friends and how those feelings might change. We'll look at what type of things a family might need to think about when it comes to any follow-up post-diagnosis. We'll be exploring types of support and what may be helpful in knowing more about in terms of dementia and how to live well. Finally, we're going to think about planning for the future and what this might entail.
So just before we kind of cover this slide, I just wanted to explain about our little green speech bubbles. They are all quotes from our lovely carers and families who we work with, who were kind enough to give us some of their thoughts about the impact. And we won't read them all out, but I think they're really important to read just to kind of get an understanding of the real impact of experiencing a diagnosis and some of the things that people are living with day to day. So when someone receives a diagnosis of dementia, they're really likely to experience a range of emotions. It's a very personal thing. So for some people, it can be a sense of denial that they don't believe the diagnosis, or for other people, it can be a relief that they now understand that what they're experiencing has a name, that there's a reason for it. So people might feel a sense of shock, worried and overwhelmed about the future, and those feelings can fluctuate day to day. So it might be a very different one day to another. And some people, they might never accept their diagnosis, which could be a way of coping. It could be due to feeling scared or due to insight.
When thinking about family members, those closest to the person diagnosed will often experience the same range of emotions. They might be thinking about the future and begin to grieve the loss of future planning and the person as they know them. They might feel a sense of overwhelm and worry at what the journey ahead might involve. Those who've been supporting somebody with a diagnosis might find acceptance early on. They may find that they come to terms with the diagnosis down the line, or for some people, they might not accept the diagnosis at all. And it's really important to consider this range of emotions and just how this might fluctuate. So thinking about roles and relationships, and it's important to recognise that dealing with a diagnosis is very personal. It's individual in nature, and how people respond to that will vary. Some people may make the decision not to tell family or certain family members or friends, and that might be about a way of coping or embarrassment. They may decide not to do this, particularly in the early stages when their symptoms may not be as obvious to other people. However, with 1 in 2 of us either living with dementia or caring for somebody with dementia, that diagnosis might not come as a shock to family and friends. In terms of family systems, we hold various roles within our families, and families can be made up of, of different people. You might be a parent, you might be a grandparent, a child, a sibling, and when a diagnosis of dementia is given, that might impact on the roles that we hold and the relationships that we have. Some things might need to adjust and change, and it can take some time for this to happen.
I think sometimes people talk, don't they, about how they feel like children might have taken on a role acting more like a parent, and that can be quite a hard adjustment for people. And in relationships where one person has perhaps been the breadwinner or the person who's always done all the housework, and those kind of changes within those family systems and those changes in role can be quite challenging for some people. And the other role I think we wanted to think about a little bit is the role of someone as a carer, and it could often take a long time for someone to recognise themselves as a carer. You know, it's something we hear a lot, people saying, well, I'm not really a carer, I'm just a husband, or I'm just a daughter. And you know, people don't stop being a husband and they don't stop being a daughter, but actually being a carer is something that's quite important and quite separate and needs some kind of recognition and support in its own right, because it comes with, you know, both stresses and difficulties and its own needs, having a role as a carer, and some changes in relationships sometimes. But also caring can come with its own benefits and strengths, and it can be something that builds skills and sometimes can open up new ways of looking at relationships. Sometimes it might give you the opportunity to learn something about the person that you're caring for that you might never have had the opportunity to learn before, or to do things with the person that you might never have done previously. So there's lots of things about those roles that it's important to think about and have time and support to adjust to. So you've got your diagnosis and you've thought about telling people, but then what's next? So what's the follow-up? You need to be thinking about what appointments have you got, who are they with, what do you do in the meantime, what about medications? So there are lots of questions that you might want to ask and need to get answered. Medications we're not going to talk about in any detail. There's lots of good information on the Dementia UK website, and it obviously depends on what sort of dementia you have and your physical health, so that's a very personal thing. But if you have some appointments with sort of memory service or post-diagnostic services, then they would be able to answer those questions, and you might want to think about asking what there is and any side effects and things like that. So those are important questions for people to ask and get answered.
It's really important that people diagnosed and their families have a sense of what will happen in terms of next steps after a diagnosis. As you can imagine, this time will be very worrisome, so it's important to have that information given. Most of the information will likely be given at the diagnostic appointment with the memory services, but it can be helpful for people to make a note of people who they've come into contact with and what they'll be doing next. The Dementia UK practical guide to getting the most out of your appointments can be a useful place to jot things down. So moving on from the diagnosis and informing family and friends, we really want to be thinking about the education and how somebody might understand and find ways to cope with the diagnosis. So in your local area, it's likely to be services that can offer courses and workshops related to dementia. Some might be for the person with the diagnosis, others for the family and the carers. Cognitive stimulation therapy is a programme, a non-drug treatment that's aimed at boosting the well-being of the person with the diagnosis through the use of puzzles, conversation and peer support. Places such as local council websites, Age UK and carer organisations are good places to find this information. Lots of people find accessing peer support in their community or online a way to connect, share experiences, learn with and from others in similar situations. Some organisations that offer this support might base it around a coffee morning or a singing group or a dual purpose group that offers individual support for the person with the diagnosis and support for the carer. That can be really helpful in terms of both parties being able to access support at the same time, as this can be a barrier for many families living with dementia.
So both people living with dementia and their carers can experience mental health challenges such as anxiety and depression, and that might be pre-existing or it might be new, might be related to the diagnosis. So there are services that can offer talking therapy, counselling, Some of these can be workshops or groups that might be offered in person or online. Usually there's an assessment for these. They're often offered through what used to be called IAPT, but is now NHS talking therapies. And I think it's useful to kind of consider these for people to offer that additional support. Obviously, we couldn't get away without mentioning Admiral nurses in here. We think they're a very valuable service. But there are other kind of dementia support services around, and it's worth knowing what's available in your local area to offer dementia support on that kind of tailored basis as well.
We really want to emphasise that people with a diagnosis of dementia can live well, and when thinking about living well, you might want to focus on lifestyle, so encouraging healthy activities, things like walking, getting out in the fresh air, can also have a really positive benefit on somebody's physical and mental health. You might be discussing with families whether they're up to date with things like eye appointments and hearing tests, dentist appointments, generally up to date with their physical health via the GP. Really important to consider living well.
Both for carers and for people living with dementia as well. Sometimes I think carers can miss going to doctors themselves because they're busy looking after the person that they're caring for. So it's an important thing. And when we're looking at sources of support, it's a really wide thing, because support looks really different to different people, and it's based on what they need at that time. So support for one person might just be someone at the end of the phone that they can chat to now and again. It might be knowing that the National Admiral Nurse Helpline's available, that they can just ring up and ask a question. And we always say to people, there's no silly questions, because you don't know what you don't know. For other people, it might be more practical support. It might be having some companionship service, someone to come and sit with the person that they care for, so that they can go out and have a couple of hours to themselves, and that might be really important. Might be more practical support with things like personal care for the person living with dementia if they're at the point of needing that support. It might be support for the person living with the diagnosis to get out and do the things that they really enjoy, that they love, if they can't manage those as independently anymore. But for them to continue living well, it might be really important that they're able to carry on getting out to, a football game, or being able to carry on going out for I don't know what else people like to do. Crochet class. I know someone who likes to go to a crochet class. So those sort of things that people really find important. And support might come from friends, it might come from family, it might come from professionals, professional carers, paid carers, and it might be accessed through Admiral nurses, it might be accessed through the local authority, or it might be something that's arranged privately. So there are lots of options for support, and finding out about what support's available is something that you can do, again, through sort of local council, through Admiral nurses. It might be something that's included within that sort of diagnosis process that you might be told at your post-diagnostic appointment about sources of support in your local area. So this is a page entirely of quotes, so we are going to read a few of these out, but I think what we really wanted this to reflect is that a diagnosis doesn't mean everything else stops, and living well is probably the most important thing to us. Just because somebody gets a diagnosis of dementia, that doesn't mean they can't continue living their life. And many people, do live well for many, many years, and not everything has to be about the diagnosis. So we wanted to just take a few of these and just reflect on them a little bit. We'll read a couple out and then just think about maybe some of the things and the meanings behind it. So I'm just going to pick one from the middle. So This one says, make the best memories, take the photos, laugh and take it day by day. And I love this. You know, this is having the pictures, having the memories to reflect on, and absolutely taking it day by day. You never know what's around the corner. We never know what's going to come next. And so making the most of each day as it comes is really, really important, I think, for
I agree.
the people that we know and that we work with.
Another carer said to live in the moment, find joy when you can, and accept that it's a roller coaster. And I think that just highlights, you know, that reflection of the fluctuation that people with the diagnosis can experience, and obviously their carers will be going along the roller coaster ride. You know, at times it can be very bumpy, other times it will be a bit smoother, and people will feel more able to manage and to live well. But I like that quote because it shows the journey that people can experience.
And this made us both laugh. Don't isolate yourself from friends and family. It's not leprosy. Although I hope we're not going to offend anyone who's got leprosy, which is very curable these days, just to be clear. But it's we think it's really important. You know, people can become very socially isolated, and it's important to be able to have that social contact. It's very good for our mental health. It's very good for both carers and people living with dementia to have that social contact with other people. It helps keep us well. So we would really go with that quote, wouldn't we? You know, keep in contact with others. Peer support is brilliant. I know that I steal all of my best ideas from other carers and people living with dementia, and then absolutely sell them as my own when I go and see other people. So I am, you know, a shameless idea thief, because I think, you know, people with lived experience are absolutely the people who have all of the best ideas about how to cope. And I'm gonna steal another one as well, Claudia, because I also love this. Try and find other things to think about too. Do things you enjoy. Don't spend all your time worrying about the future, because I think this is something that we could all apply to our lives sometimes. You know, I think that's very true for all of us.
The last one is about not putting things off. So now there's no excuse for putting things off and doing things that that are really important. So going on holidays, this might be things that you've done in the past, and there's no reason not to continue that now just because there's a diagnosis. I mean, as long as it's possible to do that. The clarity of not putting things off can feel liberating. So that's really about the sense of empowerment that it can give somebody. The fact that there's the diagnosis there, and it can give people that push that they need to really start doing things that they've wanted to do, and enjoy their lives in the way that they want to, which again I think we could apply to us, because like you said, we don't know what's around the corner.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, so this is my favourite slide in the whole presentation. So I hope that it's meaningful to you as well, because I think, you know, our carers, our people living with dementia, they're the people who really understand more than anyone what it's like, and they're the people who can give us the real insight into this.
So some practical bits that we'll just cover very briefly. Informing employers for people with dementia might still be in paid employment. It'll be wise for them to have a conversation with their employer about reasonable adjustments that might be made. The DVLA might be particularly concerning for some people, and an area that they want to talk through with an Admiral nurse or another professional around some advice and some reassurance. People living with dementia, they're able to drive as long as that's safe to do so, and people are absolutely entitled to continue working, perhaps with additional support. You can get specialist advice around things like employment, available from organisations, and we can support people to have those conversations and access other organisations. Driving and working can be a big part of a person's identity and really impact how they feel about themselves. So this is an important area to consider.
The other bit that we put on here just as a consideration is registering as a carer. So this is something that you might do with your GP. Local carers organisations might support you to register as a carer, and it can just be something that's useful so that it's sort of flagged on your records. It might give you access to things like longer appointments at the GP. If you need to take the person that you're caring for with you. And there are schemes which offer things like carers identity cards, which might allow you to, say, accompany the person that you're caring for to the cinema and things like that. So perhaps you might not have to pay to accompany them to the cinema or to other places as well. So it can just be something that can allow you to support the person that you're caring for.
So just moving on slightly and thinking about planning for the future. It's always worth advising people to get a benefits check as things change. There's various benefits that people may be entitled to. Ways to access information around benefits may come through local charities or organisations, or you can have a look online on those eligibility checkers. Some benefits, such as council tax, need a qualifying benefit in order to claim, but again, more information via various channels. Thinking about power of attorney, which is a legal document that allows a person of your choosing to make decisions on your behalf in the event that you lose capacity. There's two types of power of attorney, one for health and welfare and the other is for property and finance. You don't need a solicitor to apply for power of attorney. It's possible to do that online.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd totally advise anyone to kind of have a look at getting a power of attorney. And that doesn't matter whether you've got dementia or not. It's a really useful document. Wills, I think probably most people are aware of what a will is. It's a document that you write to decide what you want to happen to your estate and possessions after you die. It's an important document. There are charity will months in sort of March and October and November, and they can give you a kind of free or a discounted will, although they kind of think about whether or not you'd consider leaving something to charity or making a donation to charity in order to make your will. And advanced care planning, again, this is something that we like to think about quite a lot, which is writing down a sort of plan of what your wishes would be if you were to become unwell, about what sort of medical care you might want, what sort of medical care you might not want in the circumstances that you were to be unwell. And it's a really important conversation for everyone to have, really. It doesn't all have to be done in one go. We don't have to sit down and have a very full-on conversation where we go, right, okay, if this happens to you, what do you want to happen? If this happens to you, what do you want to happen? You know, we can do it a bit at a time, and it can be a conversation where we involve all of the family, or we can do bits of it on a one-to-one basis. But it's really important to think about the future, and you know, we're all of us likely to have some health issues at some point in our lives, and I think, you know, being able to choose, you know, would we want to go to hospital, would we want to be cared for at home, what sort of care would we want? That's really important, that we can make those decisions, and it supports not just us in getting the care that we want, but if we're not able to say at the time that this is the sort of care that we want or don't want, if we put that down in writing, then that's really supportive for our family or friends or whoever is looking after us at the time. It's a really big help to know that they're able to carry out our wishes. So yeah, we're big fans of advanced care planning, and I think it's a really important thing for people to start looking at, and as early as possible. Although we know that they can be difficult conversations sometimes. But yeah, if you can start looking at it as early as possible, that's great. So this is the last little bit of our presentation, and we just wanted to talk about creating a life story. And we've got a big quote on the screen, and this isn't a quote from one of our carers, this one, but this is something that we find that we say a lot, and it's that if you know one person with dementia, then you know one person with dementia, because everyone is unique. They all have their own story, they all have their own history, and being able to learn a little bit about that, being able to connect to that, can be a really important tool. It can be really useful for getting to know someone, to understand them, to understand what is important to them, and to support them in being able to live well with the diagnosis. And there are lots of different ways that we can go about sort of creating a life story. It doesn't have to be just something that we write on a page. It can be collecting things together like photos. It can include things like memory boxes, family videos, and it can really create a sense of connection. It can be a really lovely thing, I think, for families to do together, and for us to do with people as well.
Yeah, because I think when you're supporting, think about families supporting somebody with dementia, sometimes they can get up in the day-to-day life admin, if we can call it that, and thinking about somebody's life and who they are as a person. Again, as Ruth said, it brings that connection, but it can also be helpful for us as professionals. We're coming into people's lives, and the more we know about them, we can kind of think about the support that they may need and tailor that to the person. So there are different ways of capturing somebody's life story, in essence, who we are as people.
And that really is, I guess, one of the things, the heart of person-centred care, and that's what we would always kind of think about, is that, for any of the things that we would have advised for people throughout this presentation, for any of the things that we would think about, all of it has to be a really kind of personalised thing, because for every family it's going to be slightly different. Everyone's reactions to a diagnosis are going to be different. Everyone's journey is going to be a little bit different. And so we really want to think about actually what works for one person isn't going to be perfect for another. So it's about getting to know people and working with people to find out what works for them, what do they need, and really tailoring that. And life story, I guess, is just a part of that we wanted to just add on at the end. And so
that brings us to the end of our summer school presentation. So thank you for having us. It's been an honour to share a little bit about what we do with families.
Yeah, it's been lovely to be here, and if you've got any questions for us, now is the time to ask. Thank you very much for listening.